What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, and I'm back with the next movement in our journey through the 40th Symphony of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, as performed by the Berlin Philharmonic and conducted by Herbert von Karajan. And this one is listed as a Menuetto, which is the Italian form of the French dance minuet, and then Allegretto, which I believe means at a brisk pace, reasonably fast, and then trio, which I think relates more to the arrangement. I could be wrong about that, but yes, it's a Menuetto, and then parenthetically Allegretto, and then trio. I don't remember this movement all that well. I think it has a drama to it, but again, the first movement of this symphony is the only one I recall reasonably well going into this journey. So yes, I don't quite have a clear memory of what to expect here, other than it will be reasonably fast in terms of the tempo and dance-like. So let's give it a listen. This is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, his 40th Symphony, third movement, which, as I said, is listed as a Menuetto, Allegretto, and trio, and it is performed by the Berlin Philharmonic and conducted by Herbert von Karajan. shorter movement, definitely. So yeah, it's a movement with some contrasting moods across the course of it. Certainly the section that opens it and which is right near the finish as well, it's big, it's heavy, it's dramatic, there's a bit of intensity to it. And it's funny because in one way that had me thinking that the melody itself was almost like Baroque-like, even though that's prior to Mozart's time. But then aspects of the bigger and heavier sections also sounded a bit like early Romanticism, which is slightly ahead of Mozart's time. But the softer parts and that type of composition where he has something very big and heavy, followed by light, like flutes and woodwinds right after that, that feels very Mozart and very classical era, which is the era that he's seen as one of the defining figures of, if not the defining figure, because he came near the end of the classical era and encapsulated it perhaps better than anyone. So on balance, and just in terms of my subjective impressions, it was a little bit Baroque, a little bit romantic, and very much articulating the late classical sound. So in that regard, I suppose it is quintessentially Mozart. But yes, definitely one that gives you a sense of contrasting intensity and a nice dynamic over the course of it. So perhaps that's why it's, both a menuetto and a trio. Maybe a trio is like another type of dance, because it felt like there were two sections that were offset against each other. Maybe that's the menuetto and trio, and maybe the fact that Allegretto is put into parentheses is an indication like play these two dance parts at a reasonable tempo and sort of progress through them at a brisk pace. So maybe that's what that's about. Again, I have a slight understanding of the conducting directions that composers would put into their pieces, but ultimately, I didn't get formally trained. I did take a college course in classical music history, and although it was more focused on the actual history and, talking about different composers, different periods in terms of what became common and what forms emerged or consolidated and so on, that led to at least a little discussion about what the forms were, the actual technical details. But I'm not formally trained like the way a music student would be. I was a history major, so I was taking that, number one, because of my own interest in classical music, but number two, it was a history course, but on the music end of the spectrum. So in any case, I don't have an academic knowledge of what the conducting directions mean. Nevertheless, I enjoy the short intensity of the piece as well as its balance. It does have contrast, but by extension I feel like it is well balanced. I want to say that's like under 5 minutes long. Yeah, about 4.5, so definitely a shorter movement, certainly shorter than the first two movements. When we come back for the last one, it's listed as a finale, an allegro, what is that? Allegro something, but unfortunately my eyes and the lighting are not cooperating, so I guess I'll figure that out between now and the next reaction. Just wanted to give a slight shout out to my great friend Chris, who sent me a mug which features insults from William Shakespeare all over the mug. So I would say that movement was a bolting hutch of beastliness, just to quote one of the lines here. I'll try to incorporate some more of those in my reactions this evening. In any case, let me know what you think. We'll see you next time. Peace.